Thank you. Question number 4, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to some members of the judiciary expressing opposition to juryless rape trials.
First Minister.
The Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Bill includes proposals for a time-limited pilot of judge-only rape trials. The Senators of the Colleges of Justice response clearly sets out that they do have split views on the proposal. Organisations including Rape Crisis Scotland, Victim Support Scotland, Scottish Women's Aid, we know that they support the pilot. They, like many, they're concerned at the experiences of complainers, the influence of rape myths and the lower conviction rates of rape. The Senator's response states, and I will quote directly, that there is a serious problem with what happens in jury trials for rape cases, end quote. The pilot stems from the recommendations, of course, by Lady Dorien, as I know Christine Graham is aware of. She is, of course, Scotland's second most senior judge. And as part of that report and review into how we improve the justice system, particularly for victims and survivors of rape, while also, and this is crucial, protecting the rights of the accused too.
Christine Graham.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. I too have read the submissions from the Senators, both for and against. I'm not quoting, but I'll paraphrase. There is the evidential difficulty that most alleged victims and the accused were in a relationship, sometimes even after the alleged crime, and that may influence the low conviction rate no matter what we use. The right to a fair trial under the European Convention of Human Rights, which is embedded in the Scotland Act, as this may affect the accused. And I think, crucially, as the government, I understand, is to assess the efficacy of this pilot. For me, this trespasses on the principle of the separation of powers of legislature and judiciary, an extremely serious issue. So will the First Minister confirm there will be robust scrutiny of this proposal, that his government has an open mind as reflecting on these concerns and indeed my concerns?
First Minister.
Yes, of course, we will be open-minded in our consideration of the legislation. And that's why the committee stage of this bill, the evidence-gathering stage of this bill, is such a crucial part of the legislative process. It allows us to hear quite robustly, often quite powerfully, the various arguments being put forward. And I do go back to my point, of course, that this recommendation for a time-limited pilot of juryless trials is coming from a review conducted by the second most senior judge, a very experienced judge, I think a judge who commands wide respect right across the political chamber, as Lady Dorien does. And therefore, it's important we do give that weight, as we do also give weight to those voices who have expressed concern, not just the judiciary, but we know many members of the legal profession too. So we will, of course, give that weight. We will also give the voice of victims and survivors weight in this decision and the passage of this bill too. And we do need to improve the experience of rape complainers. I think all of us absolutely accept. I think all of us would also accept the rape myths that do exist within juries as well. And maybe I'll end with a quote from Rape Crisis Scotland, which has stayed with me since my days as Justice Secretary and to this very day. And I quote them, that many survivors describe the process of going to court more traumatic than the rape itself. That is an unacceptable position in any justice system, let alone ours.
Yeah. Ivan McKee.
The case for juryless trials in rape cases often cites the work undertaken by Professor Fiona Lerwick and her 2020 report on juries and rape myths. However, that report concludes by stating, before suggesting anything as drastic as removing juries from criminal trials, however, it is worth considering whether the answer might lie in addressing problematic attitudes via juror education. This, it is argued in the report, is the way forward before more radical measures are considered. Does the First Minister agree?
First Minister.
Yeah, I think it's not a case of just doing either or. I think it's absolutely acceptable to explore both. So I think education, of course, trying to tackle rape myths in society more generally is something that is incumbent upon us to do in government, but also to consider the pilot. Ivan McKee was right to reference, I thought, an excellent piece of work, the most comprehensive jury research undertaken, I think, in the entire UK. That work done by Professor Fiona Lerwick, James Chalmers and others. I'm happy to correct the record if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Professor Lerwick does support the proposal for a pilot. I do welcome steps that the judiciary have taken to improve jury education, and I will highlight the Senators' comments from the Senators testing rape myth directions with juries this year, and I'll quote that when it came to judge directions, they did not prevent acquittals which appear to the trial judge to be conspicuously generous on the evidence adduced. So there is definitely a role for education around rape myths.
Briefly, First Minister.
There is, but there's also the option, I think we should be exploring, juryless trials.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Lawyers across Scotland say they will boycott the SNP's planned juryless trials, with senior judges also raising concerns that removing jurors constitutes political meddling in the independence of the judiciary by this SNP government. So, as I asked his Justice Secretary yesterday, will Humza Yousaf ignore these concerns, pass his bill and simply hope for the best?
First Minister.
Of course, we will listen to the views of the legal profession. We'll listen to the, of course, weight of opinion of the judiciary. And, of course, we'll give appropriate weight to the voices of victims and survivors too. But I do go back to the central point. I would make this point quite robustly to Russell Finlay, that this pilot or proposal for a pilot of juryless trials is coming from Lady Dorian. Yeah. It is not government interference by simply exploring a recommendation from the second most senior judge, the Lord Justice Clerk of Scotland. So I think it doesn't do an issue that requires great sensitivity, any justice, where we attempt to throw around terms like political interference, regardless of who that comes from. So I think let's absolutely give consideration to the voices of the judiciary. Let's also not forget the voices of victims and survivors in this issue too. Absolutely.